Um,
Press that. Looked at it because they don't want to do it. They just want to post it.
Gratefully, I'm sure on her part, no.
Yeah, they don't want to do a report. And I was like, listen, they play me for their things. And like, I don't know.
So now it's on. See, that's the issue. That I don't want them to have to be fooling around. Let me see if I'll just go grab two.
They didn't release it without telling me. It also wasn't a sufficient report. It does not look like the first report at all.
Right. Yeah.
You're like,
So we got DOT's comments yesterday. Yeah. I can imagine. Yeah, this isn't good. Well, it was
And they haven't hung it yet.
no.
Which was except if it hadn't gone
Adjustment in there. This is an audio check. Audio check 1 2 1 2. Testing 1 2 3. Audio check 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3.
That's kind of scary.
ahead and get started. I appreciate all of our witnesses coming in today for this roundtable. Obviously, we're going to talk about today's out-of-control inflation and the impact it's having on construction costs around the country. Obviously, project timelines are being impacted and the state of our nation's infrastructure as a whole. Just yesterday, we saw the annual inflation rate reach 9.1%. Inflation's at its highest point in 4 decades, and it's increased a staggering 550% in the 2 years since President Biden took office. Inflation is hitting the pocketbook of every American, and it's hitting the transportation and construction industries particularly hard. It's possible and even likely that the bad economic news is going to get worse. CBO predicts that inflation is going to continue into next year, and economists are actually predicting a recession. The Biden administration has left inflation completely unchecked. It's undeniable that the current high prices we're experiencing have been greatly exacerbated by the far left's misguided policy agenda, and there's no quick and easy fix to get us out of this mess. As a result, the funding provided in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is shrinking in value every single day. The Center for Transportation estimates that inflation has eroded at least 1/5 of the increase in funding provided by the law and projects that the entire funding increase could be wiped out if inflation continues at the current levels. Today, I hope to hear more from each of you about the impact inflation is having on your operations in particular, and the ways that you're adapting and the tough decisions that you've been forced to make that you didn't have to face just a few years ago. Before we hear from folks, I do want to give a brief run of how this is, or of the folks that we have, or how we're going to do this. I'm going to ask each participant, starting with Dr. Wilson, and going down the table to briefly introduce yourself and your organization. And please keep your opening comments short, preferably to 1 or 2 minutes. We are going to have a vote that's coming up in an hour and a half, so we want to get through everybody. And I'd like for real dialogue to occur after the introductions. And I'll start with a few questions for the group, and then I'll go to our subcommittee ranking members for the questions, and then others in the room. And we won't be timing anyone here when we go through the questions, because I would like this to be a dialogue. This isn't a hearing. But I ask that everyone respect each other's time, and keep your questions to 1 or 2. But this is an informal event, and it's meant to spur discussion. So with that, we will start with Dr. Wilson and Secretary of the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development. And you're here on behalf of the American Association of State Highway Officials.
Thank you, Congressman and members. It's a pleasure to be with you today to address this very important issue. First, I would be remiss if I didn't thank this body for the investments and the commitment to infrastructure that you've made in this most recent passage of this bill, because it's critical to our economy. Likewise, the importance of what you're doing today is addressing the issue of inflation, because it is impactful. It is having an effect not just on DOTs across the country, but industry in general. And the most important thing for us to be able to do is to manage expectations. And you've heard it said before, everyone has a right to their own opinions, but the facts are the facts. And as you said in your opening remarks, there is a percentage of expectation that's not going to be delivered because of inflation, because of supply chain, because of a number of issues that we see, because of workforce. And so DOTs are committed to delivering. We're accustomed to having limited resources and managing these types of issues over the long haul. And so we're excited to be here today to present on behalf of state DOTs around the country and share some of the experiences that we're seeing and some of the solutions that we are putting forward for many of the folks who have local businesses represented in our state that are represented here today, whether they're truckers or suppliers or contractors. We are working with them hand in hand. and engaging in discussions at the local level to do what's best for them and for our states. And it's different all across the region, but there is some commonality, and we look forward to participating and learning in this process as well. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Mr. Palco and with the AGC.
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. Thank you, panel.
Might turn your mic on.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Congressman. Thank you, panel, for having us here. My name is George Palco, president of Great Lakes Construction Company, just south of Cleveland, Ohio. We are a self-performing heavy civil contractor in business for 75 years. I'm here to represent the AGC. I am the current Highway and Transportation Division Chairman for this current year. I appreciate, as the doctor said, the panel taking the opportunity to hear from the boots on the ground, if you will, of what we are experiencing. Being a contractor, we are experiencing construction inflation. We are experiencing the impacts of not getting jobs awarded. We are seeing the impacts of subcontractors and vendors walking away because of what the price really is by the time a project gets awarded. So I look forward to sharing the story of our company and our members with you here this morning.
Mr. Summerford,
Thank you, Mr. Congressman.
American Trucking.
Good morning. I'm Harold Summerford, Jr., Chairman of the Board of Directors of the American Trucking Association and CEO of J&M Tank Lines. J&M is a family-owned business specializing in dry bulk transport that employs over 500 workers in 10 terminals across Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and Texas. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Over 80% of American communities rely exclusively on trucks for freight services. So capacity constraints on trucking supply chains caused by inflation and short-sighted policies directly impact the cost for those consumers. Please consider the following priorities as you address the critical economic issues facing our nation. 1, infrastructure funding. Eliminating bottlenecks and making highways more efficient is essential to our economic resilience. Targeting infrastructure dollars to road and bridge improvements rather than wasteful, inflationary products that enable maximum utilization of trucking capacity will ensure that goods get to market at the lowest possible end cost for consumers. Second, fuel cost. America needs an all-of-the-above approach to lowering historic energy prices. Fuel is the second highest cost for trucking companies. 97% of them operate with fewer than 20 trucks. Capacity provided by these fleets are central to our economy, and those companies are the hardest hit by diesel prices, over $2 per gallon higher than they were a year ago. And third, workforce and entrepreneurship. Trucking is short 80,000 drivers right now, and we need to hire more than 1 million new drivers in the next decade to keep pace with expected demand growth. The quickest way to ensure supply chains have access to affordable trucking capacity is to improve pathways for students and other workers to begin rewarding careers as truck drivers and owner-operators. In addition to the Drive Safe Act, Younger Driver Apprenticeship Program, and the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we must recalibrate federal workforce programs to prioritize skilled trades and protect the independent contractor model that empowers tens of thousands of owner-operators to enter the trucking industry and grow successful small businesses. The ATA Federation represents 34,000 motor carriers and suppliers in every state and congressional district across the country. Our members thank you for your attention to these issues that are critical to the business and our nation's continued economic growth. Thank you.
Is it Borsling?
Burstling.
Borsling?
Thank you.
I failed spelling.
It's a German name. There's 10 letters. It's very complicated. Good morning, everyone. I'm Robin Burstling. I'm the Vice President for Infrastructure, Innovation, and Human Resources Policy at the National Association of Manufacturers. The manufacturing sector continues to lead the economy through really challenging times. And I really want to take a moment to thank the workers, many transportation workers and manufacturing workers who moved and made things through the pandemic. We're successful and healthy today because of their contributions and willingness to show up so that we could have food, medicines, and supplies we need. And I just don't think we can thank the workers enough. This unyielding spirit of getting things done certainly continues in the manufacturing sector. Manufacturers contribute $2.7 trillion to the economy annually. For economic impact, for every dollar spent in manufacturing, $2.68 is added to the overall economy, and these are very high-paying, high-quality jobs that pay approximately $92,000 annually for individuals in manufacturing. So strengthening our competitiveness is a leading goal of every manufacturer. About 83% of manufacturers right now have a positive outlook on the economy, but there are a lot of challenges ahead of us. And just a few of those major challenges that are facing manufacturers include increased raw materials costs, inflation, supply chain, and the workforce. These are really big challenges, and they're not independent forces, but interrelated. And I think it's best to use the example of the Jenga game. Everyone knows and loves this game, building a tower with lots of different blocks. And so manufacturing right now is an extremely challenging environment, but we can build a tower. But you start taking the workforce issue, inflation, supply chain costs, and all the things that are happening, thinking about West Coast ports in particular, the tower becomes a little bit more challenged to stand tall and strong. So I look forward to the conversation, and thank you for inviting me.
Yes, Hugh back.
You bet.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Leader Graves and members of the committee. I'm honored that I'm here speaking in front of you today. I'm from Spencer, Massachusetts. We are a fourth-generation family aggregate and asphalt manufacturer supplying aggregates and asphalt to central Massachusetts. I'm also honored this year to be the chair for the National Stone, Sand, and Gravel Association. So here I'm also representing over 7,000 quarries, and we employ over 100,000 people. And this is to source 2.6 billion tons of aggregate to feed the economy of the United States. Inflation, energy costs, and specifically the cost of fuel is impacting every aspect of my business. Fuel prices have almost tripled this past year, which is driving every cost for the materials we produce. I heat my asphalt with diesel. So as you can see, that changes dramatically even on a daily basis, which makes it exceptionally difficult for me to be competitively priced, whether it's for private companies, municipalities, the state. The cost for these materials, the running of the quarry, the creating of asphalt, and then the trucking to job sites. It's next to impossible for us to be competitive. And this is with every aspect and for every business that I represent as being chair of NSSGA. So again, I look forward to answering questions, and thank you again for having me here today.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Waddell.
Good morning. Thank you, Ranking Member Graves and the other members of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee for the invitation and the opportunity for this discussion. My name is Luke Waddell. I'm a councilman for the city of Wilmington, North Carolina, and I also serve as a board member on our region's Metropolitan Planning Organization, as well as our Public Utility Authority. I look forward to this discussion alongside the various stakeholders on this panel of how rapidly rising inflation has affected planned infrastructure and capital improvement projects, and providing anecdotal examples specifically related to the challenges municipalities are facing. Thanks again for the opportunity.
All right, we're going to jump right into questions, and I'm going to start with Mr. Rouser. Right next to him.
I thank the ranking member, and I want to welcome all the panelists, and in particular, my friend Luke Waddell. Luke is new to the Wilmington City Council, doing a great job, small business owner. And today happens to be his birthday. So I don't know if any of y'all want to sing the Boehner birthday song real quick, but maybe not. They don't look like they're too eager. That's why we're in politics and not singing for a living. But they are also, he and his wife are also expecting. And so a lot going on with Luke there, and really proud of him and the work that he's done. And I know he's going to be a great contributor today. A couple things I want to mention real quick. I'm a former state senator and still have a lot of good relationships back home in the state legislature. And I talked to one of my buddies who actually chairs the Transportation Committee in the Senate back home. And he mentioned to me that North Carolina is sitting on $5.2 billion in unspent COVID money. And a lot of that is in the area of broadband and water and waste, where the state has appropriated for it, but there's no way they can possibly meet the federal deadlines. I suspect there are many other states around the country that are sitting on a tremendous amount of COVID money that could be, if we would allow it, if Congress would allow it, the federal government would allow it, could be, transitioned, over to other infrastructure projects to help fill the gap. Now, that's just North Carolina. I don't know what the figures are for any other state, but $5.2 billion goes a long way, in a state like North Carolina. The other thing I want to touch on a little bit is this, and you touched on it, the worker shortage. It seems like, to me, like it's going to be really hard to get ahead of the inflation curve if you don't have enough workers, because you can't produce if you don't have workers, and if you don't have workers, you can't ship what you produce. And in my estimation, that's probably 85–90% of the supply chain hiccups is just lack of reliability of workers. And to be fair, we were short of workers before the pandemic hit, but even more so now for a variety of reasons. Luke, can you talk a little bit about some of those projects that are on hold now because of inflation and what you're seeing on that front, as you alluded to in your opening statement?
Certainly. Thank you, Congressman Rouser, for letting everybody know it's my birthday. Just added a little pressure here. But after being invited to the roundtable, I requested from our city staff in Wilmington to put together some capital improvement projects that have been affected, and I was kind of anticipating one or two coming back as some examples. Within a matter of hours, they sent me 5 capital improvement projects, all of which were planned and budgeted, and the actual cost came in for each one of them well over 100% of the original project budget. One as high as 250% over that budget, resulting in a rejection of the bid and the project being put on hold for the foreseeable future. So these are real-time capital projects that provide core services that we as a municipality are having to consider scrapping or moving them far into the future. And Wilmington is like a lot of the other cities I would suspect in the Southeast, is that and across the nation, we're kind of experiencing unprecedented growth. And this growth is certainly exacerbating the need for the critical infrastructure projects and is spotlighting the challenges that inflation is causing to these critical projects, with several local municipalities having to make decisions on whether to raise taxes on the citizen that's already stretched just about as thin as they could be, or proposing bonds and sales tax referendums on upcoming ballots. So inflation's impact on the citizens that I represent is the most important day-to-day issue they're facing. And then from a municipal level, just continuing to have to extend these project timelines or scrap them altogether that would provide core services.
Yield back.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for putting this on. This is really an important, pressing issue that we're hearing about. Dr. Wilson, are the people that are doing the bidding, are they, because of price increases quickly and so forth, are they forfeiting their bond, bid bond, or even their construction bond? Or is there some flexibility in what you have as a secretary to maybe try to keep them on board or whatever?
Congressman Webster, thank you for the question. We have not seen situations where our contractors are forfeiting their bonds. What we are seeing is a pressure to guarantee and commit to a job sooner rather than later. And most agencies, when you receive a bid, you get an apparent bid, and then you go through a due diligence of verifying that the element of the bid is, the elements are responsible and acceptable, that they meet the letter of the law. And that usually takes anywhere from 2 weeks to a month to get an entire letting, because you're looking at several projects, perhaps 15, 20 projects at a time. What we're seeing and what we're hearing from our partners is that suppliers are guaranteeing prices for shorter windows of time. And that varies type of project that you have and the type of material that they're using. And so if you're needing to get steel or if you're needing to get concrete and you want to verify and guarantee your price and order, and you're not on a proportioned amount, we're seeing those effects, but we've not seen that they've lost their bid bonds as a result of what's happening in the economy with the bid process. We need to go faster. We need to be able to give them some assurance, and some states, and my state's one of them, are developing ways to, when we see a bid and accept it and it's low risk, to give them the notice to proceed or the advanced documentation to be able to proceed with their commitments.
Oh, thank you very much. That. Are people that are, I mean, well, maybe I'll just say this. Is there a product or several products that are experiencing extremely great increases in cost?
Yes, and I would tell you it depends on the region and it depends on the type of project. We've looked at a number of items over the last 6 months to a year in our state, and if we look at the top 8 items, we're seeing anywhere from a 40 to 50% increase year to year. That decreases when you add the total project, and so I will tell you the total project list, because I might have a heavy bridge letting that you're going to see steel prices. So you can't really look at it month to month. You need to look at it over a period of time. And so when you do that and you add the total of what we would call critical projects, not just those top 8, which are concrete, steel, you may have some plastics, some paint, some other things like that that are just universal, you're seeing it come down a little bit. And so we've seen a number of these items normalize, which is expected. But again, it's going to depend on your price. It's going to depend on your market. It's going to depend on the number of teams that are competing and the length of the project. So you see a project that's much shorter in its delivery, you won't see the same prices. You see a project that's going to be multi-year, a much larger project, you're going to see that instability, I guess, in the pricing there. So, but we are seeing some things in our area. Timber has come down significantly, but we don't use a whole lot of timber in our projects. We're using mostly gravel because of our environment, and steel and concrete. And so, yeah, we're seeing some of those prices normalize as well, and then the availability of that material. I'll give you an example of a bid that we let that came in about 40% over. The biggest increase in that bid was really transportation costs. It wasn't a material cost. And so it depends on the project, where it is. Are you close to rail? Are you close to water? What's the cost of shipping? Those are factors that is going to vary state by state, but as a whole, you are going to see some prices spike more than others.
So with a resurfacing project where it could be a huge amount of it could be just the cost of asphalt, something like that. Are those any different, or is it?
In some cases, they are different because we might have in our state an asphalt index, and we've had that even prior to today in this environment. So we've typically managed those prices, and we've built in a model to index fuel costs, to index transportation. And so in those situations, we can manage some of those with that system. There are other specialty items that might be hard to get. So if on that asphalt job or that overlay, if we have some major striping that has to take place, there's a shortage of being able to get the material to do the striping. The answer isn't necessarily just pay more, because if it's availability issue. So we in turn extend the time of the project or allow alternative types of materials on the job to be able to get through that process. And so we have that flexibility at the state, and it's been very helpful.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Go back. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. I appreciate it, and thank y'all for being here. Real quick, trucking industry, parts, parking, people. Talk about it.
Thank you, Congressman. Truck parking is a very serious issue right now. A truck driver will typically cut their day 57 minutes a day on the average from driving to find safe parking. And it generally will cut into their pay about $4,500 a year, being able to find parking that's well lit, security, and things of that nature. Another thing that is actually hurting by not having good parking is ease of entry for diversity for females entering our workforce. You know, and if you are looking for parking and can't find any at a truck stop or whatever, and then your next stop is the next exit up, and it may be an abandoned, you know, filling station or something of that nature, people don't feel safe parking there.
Sure.
If you're in the sleeper of that truck and somebody rattles the doors or whatever, what do you do? You know, and I mean, I don't think I'd like it, much less anybody, you know, so that is very serious. You know, there's just a huge difference in the amount of trucks that are on the road versus available parking spots at any given time.
Appreciate the input. I had an opportunity to talk to some public-private partner collaborators this morning, and across the board, concern was the money's out there from IJA, but that it's not doing what it could do because of inflation. So, George, if you want to weigh in on that, get your take on it. And Karen, I'll ask you to weigh in as well.
Thank you, Congressman. Yeah, the question of what is the impact of inflation on IJA, our industry, our association is very concerned about that, and I'll give you some examples building off of what Dr. Wilson has already stated about the inflation cost and how that impacts our bidding. I would like to backtrack just 1 second and address Mr. Webster. We would never, ever forfeit a bond. That is our lifeline. That would put us out of business, irrespective of what we're talking about today. If we forfeited a bond, we would not bid a job before we forfeited a bond. We have bid or been involved as a subcontractor on 3 projects with the Ohio Department of Transportation in the last 3 months that have been rejected due to the projects being so far over the state's estimated cost produced on the morning of the bid letting. One was a $5 million job that the state had estimated at $2.7 million. Another job was a $16 million job that the state had estimated at $13 million. And the last one was a $270 million project in Cincinnati that the state had estimated at $180 million. So those estimated numbers are what constitutes the state's budget for the year in their transportation program. And if we are going to continue to exceed budgets and estimates by 15, 20, even 50%, how are we going to show the public that we're actually putting additional work into place? That's a major concern of ours.
Thanks.
Well, the Infrastructure and Job Act, it wasn't perfect, but because the money is going to be there, it allows us to reinvest in ourselves. This is including the 5-year reauthorization of the surface transportation programs. If we didn't receive that last year, our industry would be facing a much greater uncertainty than what we are dealing with as far as short-term extensions, significantly fewer federal resources being utilized by the state DOT plans, and to modernize our roads and bridges. So we'd be looking at $47 billion versus $70 billion for highway funding. Projects that improve congestion and flow of goods will certainly help alleviate the bottlenecks that we're looking at a lot with supply issues. The 5-year, $300 billion highway reauthorization that was included in the IIJA gives us certainty to plan and supply infrastructure projects like newer roads, and not just resurfacing these roads, but expanding the road, which would, again, alleviate congestion, improve bridges, and modernize rail networks, which are certainly needed to move the economy.
Thank you. Yield back.
This mic carries a lot of responsibility, so y'all have to really be succinct in your answers. A couple of questions, I guess maybe for general contractors, maybe for the TxDOT representatives or the Department of Transportation. Is what y'all are saying, is this affecting prior contracts?
From a state perspective, we're not seeing that it's affecting prior contracts. Now, we do have some issues where we have flexibility built into that contract to deal with these overages, whether it's the claims process, whether it's change orders, whether it's time extensions. And so we're able to address it doing that. Now, and I say it doesn't affect them, but that's a normal process for us when we manage contracts. Typically, we have 100% of what we have agreed to in the bid when we issue that notice to proceed, and that those dollars are set aside. We saw this through COVID. We see it in this economy where materials or other costs are impacting the project, and we work with our contracting partners to do our best to make them whole. Most of our projects have a contingency built into it, and so it's a small amount that we're seeing that potential impact.
Congressman, a two-part answer to your question. Prior contracts in terms of contractors, I would say, are not being impacted by construction inflation if they were sold prior to 6 months ago. Supply chain is dictating more of a problem on prior contracts. For projects that have been sold within the last 6 months through today, it's definitely construction inflation, with vendors, subcontractors changing terms from quoting us a firm price at the time of delivery to quoting us a price at time of bidding to time of actual delivery. So if we're not going to put the work in place, put the pipe in place, the steel in place for 2 years from now, we're guessing what the price would be and building that in our price that we're submitting to the DOT.
Absolutely, and a couple of things. In the 2008 recession, I was in the Texas, I was actually, pardon me, going into the Texas House when the recession hit. I spent 4 years in the Texas House before I got demoted to Congress. And we figured out with the budget in Texas real quick that when diesel went to $4.85 and had been $2 and some cents, that really impacted TxDOT's budget. And the Texas legislature, as you know, only meets every other year for 140 days. So how do you forecast, 2 years in advance for something like that? It seems kind of an antithetical, and road construction, by the way, back then was down. And the prices we were getting were really reduced because companies wanted the work, okay? This is kind of antithetical now because what you're seeing was everything so high. I mean, you've got to really bid high and try to forecast high. So what seems antithetical to me is the cost of fuel is up and drivers' wages are up. What kind of percentage does that do on most of these contracts? Are you seeing a 5% increase, a 10%, or does that just depend on the scope of the actual project?
It depends on the scope of the project, also depends on the duration of the project. The large DOT project that I referenced, that the bid was $270 million, the estimate was $180 million. It was a 4-year duration project. And vendors, subcontractors, ourselves included, very skittish about what's the pricing going to be 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now. And some of the terms and conditions put on by the truckers, put on by aggregate suppliers, concrete suppliers, putting on 20% per year escalators onto the first year price. So we are adding 20% at 40% and 60% onto their first year price. So it's real easy to explain a $90 million differential on a large 4-year construction project.
All right, I want to jump back over to him real quick. Early completion bonuses. Has this put kind of a hold on those?
So, I will tell you from a practical sense, I would say it has impacted it because we're seeing projects maybe take longer and we're giving away time. Louisiana doesn't do incentives. We have not managed to move into that direction. We've typically done liquidated damages, and so we give away time much easier than we do giving away extra cash. And so we use every dollar we have extra or expected to come in on delivering more projects, because that's an important piece, not just for our industry, but for our constituents, is to continue to deliver as many projects as quickly as we can. And so we try not to do that, and that would probably add to the additional cost of projects if we had incentives.
Sure. Then finally, over to the trucking industry. It seems antithetical to me that we're 80,000 truckers down, and yet they're having trouble finding parking spots. You would think less trouble finding parking spots because there's less truckers on the road. Am I missing something, Mr. Summerford?
Well, you would tend to think that, but we are, one of the things you have to look at is of our makeup, when you look at so many trucking companies are 20 less trucks. They don't have terminal situations like a lot of us do to park on our yards and things like that, so they're relying on the truck stops. But we are down, and we'll continue to be down on truck drivers for the foreseeable future, and the parking will only get worse, especially my thoughts up in the Northeast more so than in other areas, but still everywhere.
Is that impacted by team driving, where you get one person in a truck, a driver, and they can no longer, he or she can no longer sleep in the back while the other one drives? Does that impact that scenario?
Well, if you're running a team operation and you're running the truck 24/7, all you got to do is buy fuel.
Yeah, so there's no sleeping that would.
So, but it's getting harder and harder to find team operations.
No, I got you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. So I think we'll all agree, Mr. Summerford, I'm going to ask my first question of you. California's AB5 is a complete disaster. With a stroke of a pen, 70,000 truck drivers in California now find themselves barred from doing their job or owning a business. If Congress moves forward with the PRO Act, we're looking at 350,000 truck drivers across the country facing a similar fate. What can we do to help stop states such as California from that type of overregulation and absolutely killing your industry?
Well, thank you for the question. AB5 is horrible. It's bad for our industry. It's bad for the independent contractors. It's bad for the American dream, where somebody wants to become an entrepreneur, buys a truck, and goes into business. It is, with a three-prong approach, it's going to be very hard for anybody to qualify as an owner-operator in California. And then when you look at the PRO Act, coupled with it, if that were to pass, this thing would go all across our nation, and it will put thousands and hundreds of thousands of people out of business. It's very hard, and at the end of the day, I don't think we need to make the independent contractor's job any harder than what we're making it. And California's definitely stepped that up with AB5. There's a lot of people that's going to have to be reclassified as employees, or certain companies will pull out, not knowing the certainty of the rules and regulations out there. The PRO Act will put the icing on the cake, so to speak, as far as doing away with independent contractors, I think.
So what do you think from a federal perspective? What's the fix for that? What would be the fix for that from a federal perspective?
The fix is, number one, making sure the PRO Act doesn't get passed. And then secondly, going back and try to legislate that is to making sure that federal preemption stands up, and then it, on the one hand, and then secondly, that that states like California cannot continue to push that out to us, to other states, because it will come across the United States over a period of time. And we'll be struggling in every state we're in. And so many of us depend on that for our business model.
Yeah. I appreciate the answer. I know that a lot of you are struggling with labor shortages as well. One of the things that we're going to be working on specifically in my district over the summer are a number of different workshops on workforce development. So we're going to be combining trade schools, tech schools, the businesses that are hiring into our ISDs. So we're connecting, and we're going to look at best practices in different partnerships. These types of events don't require legislation. I don't have to ask for permission or get grant dollars, but there are plenty of opportunities for Congress to act. So legislation that we have, such as the Drive Safe Act, will alleviate the regulatory barriers for trucking to ensure that we can recruit the next generation of truck drivers. But I got two questions to ask you. What else can Congress do, to kind of get out of your way? And the second question has to do with regulatory issues, regulatory costs. I know that they're a huge burden, but can you just kind of expand on the burden of regulations for you and for your truckers in the industry?
Well, in certain parts of our industry, it's harder to get involved in it. And the main thing is by the time we bring somebody into the workforce, we need a younger driver, you know, and a lot of people say, well, you know, would you hire every 18-year-old who saw to drive a truck? No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't hire every 50-year-old I saw to drive a truck. You know, you have to look at the person and determine if you think they've got the ability to carry on the responsibility. That's the one thing, but getting them in the industry early enough so that they don't go elsewhere. And this infrastructure bill will compete for truck drivers, for the construction industry. That's a given. But at the end of the day, I think that we must make it easier for somebody to get involved in it, get the Pell Grants so that they pay for truck driving schools. That'll help out. And then make it quicker to become a truck driver. It's, for example, if we even bring a driver in that's got a CDL right now and we need to get them a hazmat endorsement, it takes forever. And by the time we put them through a training school, they take the test and everything, and then it's weeks and weeks. And in a truck driver's life, that's a long time. You have to act fast. I went and got my TWIC card on purpose back in October, 2 months to get it. If I was a truck driver needing a TWIC card, I'd go find something else to do. Yeah. I mean, it's just simple. But those kind of things, you know, I think the License Act will work well. You know, being able to get, in the Jobs Act, being able to get things such as the Pell Grant, where it does compensate people to help us, and grants to help us have driving schools.
Great, thank you very much. My final two questions is for Ms. Borsling and Ms. Huback. We were pretty much energy independent 2 years ago. We have all seen the skyrocketing price of energy go up. Just a quick question. Are you, in turn, passing these additional costs along to the consumer, or are you pretty much eating them yourself? And then if you want to follow up on what you think we can do to lower energy costs, I'd love to hear your ideas.
So for manufacturers, increased raw material costs are the #1 issue right now. Yeah. We poll our members every quarter. In the second quarter, produce that result. Then we hit into supply chain and inflation. So what's driving these price increases? Obviously, raw material costs, freight and transportation costs, wages and salary, energy, shortage of available workers. So yes, manufacturers are assuming those costs, but they're also, you know, being passed through. This is a really challenging environment, and any trucking industry issue that can be resolved benefits manufacturers. And so the issue of the driver shortage is acute, and every plant manager in America knows that this trucking issue has to be resolved and has become very articulate on this, and one of the reasons why the NAM is fully for the Drive Safe Act.
Do you have any ideas on how to lower some of their energy costs?
It's an all of the above strategy, certainly, and we need to do everything we can to reduce energy costs, because it is a huge driver of all the challenges that we face.
Okay. Ms. Huback?
I wouldn't be in business if I couldn't turn around and pass on, obviously, the huge costs that we're feeling. Locally, the aggregate operations in the area, we had to go up about 20%, which is an unheard of increase this year. We sell to everybody, homeowners, municipalities, cities, states, and to the federal government, depending on the jobs. All of that gets passed on. We've had an exceptionally difficult time in the first 2 quarters of the fiscal year, because the pricing that I did for the municipalities is a firm price, and they wanted to utilize their money before the end of the fiscal year. So I was honoring pricing that I did from June of last year.
Wow.
So obviously that was a very hard hit for many of us in the aggregate and asphalt industry. What can be done? I think there's a lot. And, you know, I think a lot of it is trucking is a huge issue. I can't find drivers. I could offer $50 an hour, and I couldn't find drivers. They're just not out there. What we used to do was I would hire people and I would offer them an apprentice program. I can't do that anymore because now they have to go to school. So I have my own fleet of trucks. I would hire somebody, they'd have their permit, I would have them with another experienced driver so that they get real experience, not just book experience. And I can't do that anymore. So that puts us in, a very difficult situation. I think putting money to help with trade schools would be vitally important, because it's not just trucking, it's any type of blue-collar work, welders, mechanics, any of those from the trade schools. We don't have any of the skilled labor anymore. Again, that's driving the cost because there's less. So they all know, well, there's not a lot of us, they're gonna get a lot of money per hour that gets added on to the cost. And then again, we're adding that on to everything, to every job that we're doing. This year, there is not language with a lot of the municipalities that I bid for their fiscal aggregate needs. I opted to not bid them. So there were a lot of cities and towns that paid the money to submit for bids, and nobody bid it, because we can't. There's no protection. How is it fair for me to bid a very high cost when I'm not there yet, because I'm trying to anticipate in a crystal ball what's going to be May of 2023?
And I appreciate the answer. I think one of the issues that we face is we just had, a multi-trillion-dollar transportation bill. It's not worth nearly as much as it was, when it was passed. But the problem is that when we continue to, everybody wants more money, more money, more money. But when you continue putting more money into it, we have to understand that leads directly to inflationary costs. So there's got to be a better way, a more efficient way to be able to spend those dollars. So thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hubeck, I will get back to you on this one. But the gas tax, and obviously President Biden, many Democrat congressional members of the Democrat Party wanted to suspend the user tax, the gas tax. And I believe your association wrote a letter criticizing that. So tell me how suspending that gas tax would affect our economy today.
It would help a family about $40 maybe, but it would greatly impact the money for our infrastructure at this point. So a family isn't going to feel a difference of 19 cents a gallon, but the volume of money, the millions of dollars that the government would not get to put towards infrastructure and roads would be hugely detrimental.
So really, smoke and mirrors is all this is. That
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Mr. Summerford, the trucking companies, obviously, diesel prices are through the roof. You're spending more capital to just try to survive, and I'm assuming then you're cutting costs so you can remain sustainable and profitable. Talk about the ongoing supply chain crisis and how that's impacted equipment availability.
Well, thank you for the question. Equipment availability is very difficult right now, and it's in a dangerous position in the fact that prices are overinflated. My tractor expense is up 7% year over year, which in the long scheme of things, that's pretty good compared to other parts of the tankers that we buy are up about 100% over 2020 numbers. Where we would pay $60,000 for a tank, we're paying $120,000 for a tank. The same thing with tires, for example. And tires were, our manufacturer presented a 15% increase last year. We worked it down to a 5%. This year they presented a 17% increase, and they said if you don't like it, find somebody else to buy tires from because there's none out there. So I think this manufacturer had a 900,000 tire backlog at that time. So, so the expenses are up, and it's forced us because we don't have equipment available to buy. Our trade cycle is around 500,000, sometimes a little more miles on a tractor. Because of the availability of equipment, we're now pushing 650 to 700,000 miles on a tractor. And the fact that older equipment is bringing so much more money now, what is really worrisome is when the smaller carriers buy used equipment and they're paying, I mean, at just unseen prices to be able to be in this so-called good market that we're in right now in the trucking industry, that, you know, when the music stops playing, they're probably not gonna have a chair to sit in because they're gonna overpay for tractors. Right now, trucks are 30 to 40% off where they were, used trucks where they were 3 or 4 months ago. And those prices will keep coming down. And then if we do have a slowdown in our economy, they're gonna have a hard time, especially even considering fuel costs. So it's been extremely frustrating to get equipment, and it comes in with parts missing. You have to wait on equipment. They don't know where your tractors are sometimes, you know, things of that nature. So it's been a challenge, and it continues to be.
Thank you, Mr. Summerford. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Summerford, just want to ask you a couple follow-up questions. You know, you talk about really the multifaceted issues that the trucking industry is facing. We talk about labor shortages and the fact that we don't have enough drivers now. And I believe that our current fleet, we have aging drivers, and so we've got many drivers now. While we already have a shortage, that shortage is likely to grow and continue. And we talk about possible things such as Pell Grants and the Drive Safe Act. We know the rising fuel costs are things that your industry is dealing with on a regular basis. Just doing a little research a minute ago, you know, average diesel cost across the U.S. right now is $5.56. A year ago it was $3.34, and we know if you get into places like California, it's $1 higher. And you also mentioned the fact of the increase in maintenance costs, that those costs are continuing to go up. And so my question to you is, taking into account that we really have a perfect storm of factors that are affecting the trucking industry, fuel costs, labor costs, maintenance costs, how long do you see us being in this situation? And again, outside of things that you've already mentioned, are there things that we can address as members of Congress that will help alleviate some of the issues that you're facing and hopefully be able to reduce the amount of time that we're seeing all of these factors affect your industry?
Well, you know, one of the things is productivity on the highways. You know, traffic. Drivers are losing an unbelievable amount of time in traffic jams. And you can see the ATRI's top 100 bottlenecks. And it's unfortunate if your state's involved in it. There's members here in the room that are. You know, matter of fact, just, you know, that's about 13% of the fuel used just sitting in traffic, not being productive. Getting the productivity up, you know, I've always been told for an economic way, if you want to beat inflation, get your productivity up. So you look at things such as the traffic, you know, the being able to get a driver into a parking space so they can start their break quicker, things of that nature. You know, when we look at fuel and things of that nature, we need a predictable energy policy where that we can have pricing that people understand, like some of the other folks here that, you know, have bidded out stuff that's based on price of fuel. You know, and the bad part about a lot of this is some of these smaller fleets don't have the ability to negotiate these prices, especially fuel. And we have every contract I've got's got an escalator built into it to help. It doesn't cover it all, but it helps. And my fuel cost is up $1 million a month, year over year. And, you know, of course, we run a little bit smaller fuel tank than like long haul trucks, but, you know, it's really double to fill up a tractor with fuel now. So you take a smaller carrier, they're having this problem. So it's harder, it's gonna be, you know, so you talk to somebody about being an independent contractor. They've got, and I have people come in my office asking, say, you know, what would it, you know, can I, you know, would you sell me a truck and I'll go, And a lot of them you look at and say, sure we will, but I don't think it's good for you to be that, because you got to have backing, you got to have ability to understand the maintenance on trucks and things of that nature. So it's one of these things that we really, getting the ease of entry into our business. I think that'll help. The more people we can get in it, the more veterans. I think it'll help when trucking companies can get a better driving record from the Department of Defense. A lot of times we hire drivers and we look at veterans, and it's harder to find their driving record. Well, next thing you know, we're involved in litigation or something, and then we find out that maybe the record wasn't quite what we thought it was, things of that nature. So it's really, it's a problem which is going to take continuous work to work through. And driver pay, 2019, my average driver made just under $70,000. The highest driver made $97,000 that year. 2022, we're annualizing out at average pay being $81,000. And the highest paying driver for the first 6 months of this year is at $70,544. They're home every night. And I have trouble finding drivers. I have 38% turnover rate at our company, but it is hard. And what we're seeing now is, as we've gotten this driver pay up, people aren't wanting to work as much. Instead of working back in 2019, say 5.5 days a week to make that 70,000 average, now they're saying, well, you know what? I don't need to make 80,000. I can live off 70, so I don't want to work 5.5 days a week. I want to work 4. And that's going to be a problem, is making sure we got to have people back to work and willing to work.
Thank you very much for all coming in. And I came from California, and we were talking about AB 5. Our Congress members are actually from California. We've been doing whatever we can, because we sent a letter out to Governor Newsom to declare the state of emergency and bypass the AB 5, so we can, so we can actually bring the independent truckers coming in, and we can just relieve a little bit of our supply chain crisis. And then port, we have about 40% of merchandise is coming through LA and Long Beach port. So it's a really big problem. But on the top of the gas price and inflation and shortage of workers, and then our California Trucking Association actually challenged AB 5 case, and Supreme Court refused to hear that. So all these problems that, whatever on our side, we are doing whatever we can, but what's next that, you want to discuss a little more about it, that what we can do to work together to make sure that trucking industries, if Governor Newsom is not really moving forward to declare the state of emergency, that what can we really do to work together with the Trucking Association? Mr. Summerford.
In my opinion, in regard to AB 5, there will be companies that will take the risk and say, well, you know what, we'll run as own operators until somebody decides to enforce AB 5. My opinion is that I'm not willing to take that risk because of the backlash from it. So I think at the end of the day, we need to make sure that the state of California with the AB 5 revisit that and maybe adjust it accordingly and use a more realistic threshold to determine an independent contractor versus an employee. To me, that's the most sustainable way to do it. But it's a very serious problem. It's going to be a very serious problem in the ports.
It is a serious problem because it caused all these supply chain crises. And then having said that, Ms. Borstling, if I pronounce it wrong, then
no, you got it.
Could you share about the economic policies making things more difficult and expensive for manufacturers and businesses? There are ways to improve a backlog of supply chain crisis. Do you have any thing that we can, I've been always asking that we can work together.
Sure. Well, I'll just focus on supply chain and then the transportation side of it, because supply chain means lots of different things to different people depending on the situation. I think in the transportation side, this West Coast ports situation with a labor uncertainty is really challenging. And for those who are plant managers, supply chain leaders within the manufacturing sector, the West Coast ports are creating a situation where they don't know if they can be relied upon because you have these long backlogs of many ships and waiting to be processed. Then you have the labor uncertainty. Yes, they're still at the table. That's great. We support that. But they need to have a contract extension if they're not going to come to an agreement very soon. Manufacturers really need that certainty. So to risk $500 million a day if there's a stoppage, a slowdown, is just too much to undertake. So we really are encouraging both sides to get to an agreement soon because we can't afford this kind of uncertainty at this juncture in time. I think solving some of the driver shortage issues is certainly important to the supply chain. Unfortunately, there's some uncertainty with the Class 1 railroads right now, so we need the president to form a presidential emergency board with the right kinds of people serving in the capacity to be impartial and experienced advisors to really move the needle forward on the negotiation with the Class 1 railroads and their unions. So I think there's all these different pieces within the transportation sector where the administration, Congress, state and local officials all have to be working together because this is about our national competitiveness. Manufacturing is a critical sector to this economy with economic security interests at stake. Everything has to be right. And so when I gave my Jenga analogy earlier, it's just, we can build lots of things here in this country and we have the capabilities. I think everyone comes to the job here wanting to do the right things. Let's make it easy.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all you folks for taking the trip here, spending your time and your energy. I see things from a same perspective and a little bit of different perspective. I think the solutions are in hand here because, quite honestly, I think we, this town, oftentimes this body created the problems that you're dealing with. That's my perspective, right? And so I'm not sure I want to ask you. There is one question I want to ask Mr. Summerford, but this is a moment that I think that I would just tell you from my perspective what I think some of the solutions are. The fuel, we're talking about inflation's impact on infrastructure. Everybody in this room, and certainly you all are dealing with it every single day, every cent an increase in gasoline or diesel or jet fuel for that matter, any kind of fuel at all impacts infrastructure, every single penny. And at the percentages that we're talking about, of course they're going to be huge, whether it's moving the stuff, whether it's getting it out of the ground, whether it's putting it back together and putting it on the ground, it's all part of it. And quite honestly, I think that too many times in Washington, D.C. and in state houses and so on and so forth, for the sake of comity, for the sake of getting along and bipartisanship, we have gone with the other side on things that we know are insane, right? We are not ready for an electrified transportation network. We can't power it. It's not ready for prime time in the vehicles. None of it's ready, but we're forcing the market there. And of course, you're all experiencing, and we're all experiencing the effects of that because in this place, it's too difficult to say, no, I'm not voting for any of that garbage. I'm not allowing any of it. I refuse to every single time, and it's little bits at a time that then become huge, and this is the manifestation of it. President Biden's over across the world right now trying to get Saudi Arabia to pump more oil. Ladies and gentlemen, they can pump. First of all, they're not going to pump more. They can't pump more. Second of all, it's not really going to make a difference for us here. Third of all, we should be doing it here, but even when we do it here, even if we did it here today, refining capacity, right? We can pump all we want. We just closed 6 refineries, I think, last year. Like, does anybody get that that's all has an impact and that's all happening right here? There's notice of proposed rulemaking coming out today or tomorrow that's going to reduce lane capacity. We're going to have to literally start tearing up lanes and move it to transit. Like, does nobody get in here that you're sitting here as a testimony to the effects of those decisions that happen here? It is high time that we on this committee and this whole town says we're done with this craziness. Let the market do it. Now, there's some things that we can do immediately, I think. There's some things that like Mr. Summerford, barriers to entry for trucking. You're a trucking guy, you got a company, but if I'm a young man that wants to be out on my own, I don't have a family, probably a life doing trucking across the country might be pretty exciting. You're your own boss. You don't have to deal with a lot of people. You're sitting in a truck. You're hauling your load as long as you're safe and proficient and so on and so forth. The cost of a truck, not including like if you're getting in, I was in business. It's daunting what you've got to have up front to start. You talked about that a little bit. But like, for instance, we got this excise tax. Like, things are changing in the world right now. You got this huge amount of inflation, and what are we doing to lower the barriers? We can't find people. Part of the reason we can't find people is because even if we found people that wanted to do it, how in the hell can they get into it? How can they get into these Gen 4 vehicles or whatever, whether it's construction or whether it's an over-the-road tractor-trailer, when the cost, because of these environmental controls that we've all allowed here, are through the roof? Would any of that make a difference if we did anything with that stuff?
Well, I think so. There's a couple things you mentioned. One, a good example is the increase in cost of a tractor is gone up substantially since 2007. This is not quite.
How much? How much since 2007?
It's probably gone up $60,000 to what I pay in for trucks in 2007 when we started really stepping up the environmental stuff to now. But the big stage is coming up in 2024 and 2027 when we start going to like a no-NOx or low NOx.
Right.
And that's due to CARB. One manufacturer told me that in 2027 to have a truck certified to run under CARB rules, that the cost would go up $25,000 to $30,000 per truck. We have a set of standards coming out in 2024 that I will start pre-buying trucks in 2023 just to avoid that until they get the bugs worked out of it. Sometimes it's not the cost of it, it's the cost of downtime. In 2008, we saw a lot of that. A truck would run maybe 400 miles or 1,000 miles, there's no rhyme or reason, and then check engine light would come on. You have to take it to the shop. So we're wanting to avoid a lot of that, a lot of the unproductivity of owning some of this, having some of this technology. You mentioned about electric vehicles. I think that's very short thought. I don't think that we've thought this through. Number one, the same people that's against a combustion engine is against mining the materials, so we're dependent on a foreign country to provide these materials. And the disposal of the batteries themselves is problematic. And then finally, the power grid. I know of a trucking company who was going to put a 50-truck terminal in Joliet, Illinois, have 50 trucks, and they wanted to go ahead and be futuristic and have it wired and everything for electric trucks. The city came to them and said, "What are you doing?" And they told them, and they said, it'll take more electricity to charge those 50 trucks than every house in Joliet. So I think at the end of the day, we are going to be creating, and there's no telling what these electric vehicles will cost. But you're right as far as barrier of entry. It is extreme, unless you get in a truck and you're underwater to start off with. And I'm afraid some people are right now paying escalated prices with finance companies that are we got to look at ourselves too. The finance companies help support some of this truck increased prices because they see opportunities there. And some of these people, when like I said earlier, when the music stops playing, some of these people are going to be way underwater on these trucks, and it's going to be a problem again.
I suspect for every single one of you, it's not business as usual over the last year and a half. It is not business as usual. And I would just talk to my colleagues and say, it cannot be business as usual here. We've got to stop. This is going to continue unless we, the California labor rule, like, okay, so somebody took it to court, God bless them, somebody had the courage to do it and the court rejected it. Like, that should be a sign to us, to this Congress, to step in and say, we've had enough of this craziness and it's destroying our vitality and the opportunities for the American people. It's destroying them. But with that, Mr. Chairman, thanks for the opportunity. Thank you very much for coming, and I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity. I was actually more or less unfortunately, what Perry said I was going to talk about. our National Chamber of Commerce didn't do us any favors when they endorsed about 15 people. Several of them I would put almost in the Marxist territory. And they are anti-business because they think they can play ball with them, and they can't. I would hope at some point you all would come to us when there's something in like the transportation bill, which is about 85% woke, from what I understand, from what I could stomach to read. And I would hope that in the future, when we are in control, that you all would let us know this stuff is in there and we don't need it. And I would like to have very blunt conversations with y'all about that. Because when you play ball with these people, you think you're gonna, you think you're getting something, and it's very short-lived. Because as there's a parable about being in a tank with a crocodile, and you feed him everybody else, eventually he's going to eat you too. And these Marxists are going to eat you all. And we are going to lose our dadgum country and our way of life. Capitalism will be a thing, will be on the ash heap. Because when the president, I don't care if you like Trump or not, but when he said it in the State of the Union, my big takeaway from that, and the national media just glossed over it, when he said America will never be a socialist nation, and over half of the United States Congress did not applaud that. That should send a message to you all and your people. And I would hope you all quit playing ball with these folks, because right now, the Democrats, people will say, well, this one's a fairly conservative. No, they're not. Look at the total voting records of them, and they vote down the line every dadgum time. It's not your grandparents' Democrat Party anymore. They are not doing anything for your industry, and they will destroy you. And that is their ultimate goal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this meeting, this opportunity, and for all of our panelists for being here. As a farmer from California with trucks and all the other equipment too, I've lived some of this firsthand. Not the same as over-the-road folks, but we deal with the high cost of everything, and we deal with AB5 coming down the pike with what we'll have to do in order to procure some of our inputs, for example, to just keep farming. So I know you've had several allusions to AB5, and then, of course, California's great idea on that turns into the PRO Act at the federal level. And, Katie barred the door on if all this stuff can take effect nationally and what that'll mean for, owner-operators, mom-and-pop truckers and such. So would you all want to touch on that a little bit more as far as, I was looking at something online here, an intermediary, like a contract or a recruiting and staffing firm that helps get truckers placed. They're the intermediary. They're essentially to comply, since the Supreme Court didn't stop. They just had an injunction until June 30 on AB5 taking effect against owner-operators in California. Do you see this intermediary as a way out for them? In their information here, they're saying that they can still operate as an owner-operator, but basically they would be the employee of this contractor, this intermediary between that and those that actually need the work. See what I'm saying? That they could still own their truck and not be part of a company, not draw a paycheck from companies, except for working with this contractor. I'm not saying this very well, but you know what I'm talking about? Is there an intermediary? Is that going to work well, Mr. Summerford, and then also Mr. Hubax?
I don't see it as doing well. I don't see it doing well. I don't see it doing well with our company. It almost sounds like a group that would be, I've seen several in the past that would go in and form a group of drivers or contractors, and they'd lease them out to you or whatever. I don't think that really would be very efficient in a way to do it. We feel like our relationship with the driver is a better one-on-one. But I think that, and then if you look at it from the intermediary side with freight forwarders or freight people. I think it's a lot tougher in the fact that, you know, we have to make sure that they're passing on all the fuel charges and things of that nature to the owner-operator or smaller trucking company that's out there. And, but you know, when you put another layer in the deal, I think it complicates it and it gets more expensive.
I'm sure it's more complicated. It's just a deal, it's a survival thing, so the owner-operators can still exist and not have to become part of a company or an employee of a company. This looks like the intermediary for that. It's not unlike contract labor we have in agriculture, so the farmer doesn't have the pain in the rear of all the compliance and such. With the employee, you can call for that, and they handle all that complicated paperwork. We just call, we get the employees and such. So this looks like a way for the owner-operator to exist that way without just having to become part of a larger consortium. Ms. Hubax, do you have any thought on that with what you would see with sand and gravel as far as having that kind of relationship with truckers?
We rely heavily on, obviously, a lot of owner-operators at this point because I can't find drivers for my own trucks. I do think that there's a lot of things that can be done, you know, from Congress's point of view, you know, and not necessarily just trucking, but just in general to assist the economy. You know, I think a lot of it is alleviating a lot of the permit issues that we have. You know, there's ways to streamline certain permitting things. I think investing monies in, you know, a lot of the workforce so that there are more drivers or operators instead of just, you know, giving money to a lot of the Ivy League schools, maybe some of the mining schools, supporting the Jobs Act.
Yeah, we're just, you know, concerned that if somebody wants to be an owner-operator and still have the ability to do that. California is trying to throw it out the window.
Well, yeah,
Or
Massachusetts.
effectively are, and the PRO Act's trying to do it federally. Go ahead.
In Massachusetts, yet, we don't have that issue. You know, a lot of times Massachusetts will follow California, so that could be an issue.
Okay, we were talking earlier, there's a conversation about revenue coming from different forms of taxation, you know, having a holiday on gas tax and such federally, and, you know, it's 18 cents, and it really wouldn't make a lot of difference, I suppose. I don't mean that out of like, oh, you know, let them eat cake, but as far as really helping a family budget, especially with, you know, $6 gas in my home state. But in California, if you add all the taxes up, it's about $1.30 if you could make them all go away for a while. That would have a ripple. But even then, you know, there's an argument you're taking away from road work and infrastructure and such by that. But how about the excise tax on trucks? We're talking about trucks being more expensive with additional equipment being required. And I've worked on a bill for a few years now to eliminate the World War I era excise tax on new trucks, which is on top of the sales tax and other you pay. It's, I think, if I remember right, 12-15%, adds significant amount to the cost of new. They want us all to buy new trucks, right? And then they slap a tax on top that makes an extra $15,000, $18,000, $20,000 to the price of the vehicle to pay for World War I. So would anybody on the panel, how helpful would that be to the bottom line for the industry with that tax being basically eliminated?
Well, I think it'd go a ways to help, coupled with figuring out how to limit the increases from energy costs, making the trucks more energy efficient, so to speak. I think it'll go a long way. So much of what we're paying excise tax on now is inflationary prices of trucks. And if you go back, like I said earlier, if you go to this 2027 CARB and the trucks go up another $30,000 and you're going to pay 12% excise on that gain as well as, you know, the rest, to me it looks like it's just adding costs to our operating, you know, expenses. And you know, we only have a certain margin to work off of in the trucking industry, and not high margins. And we have to manage a penny, and then when it goes up, I mean, it spreads across. So I think any help that you can get is fine. I've asked manufacturers about it. I've asked dealership people the dealers for them, and I said, well, are you guys just going to absorb this additional profit in your line of work? And they said no, that they felt that most of the excise tax would be reimbursed, reflected back in an invoice cost to the carriers on new equipment.
All right. Anyone else want to comment on that?
If I may, we always called that tax a road use tax. I think the problem is the cost of a truck now is so much greater than when this tax was first started. I think it's imperative that there be some type of tax, because obviously this tax goes, for what we was told, to the federal government to pay for the use of heavier trucks on the road. I don't think any of us necessarily have an issue with that. I think it's because it's tied in to the huge price tag of a truck. If it was just a set amount instead of being a percentage, I think that would probably at this point be a better way to handle something like that.
Well, truckers pay weight fees separately too.
Oh, we pay, there's taxes, obviously, we pay overweight permits based on the state. That money goes to the state. We pay excise tax to the towns where we park our trucks, So there's so many different layers of taxes that we do pay. Where does all the money go, I think, is where we really need to control. If it all went towards infrastructure and good roads and not sitting in traffic and not burning fuel, and we could get the supplies where they needed to go, I think people would feel a lot better about paying the money.
Yeah, well, okay, thank you. What we really need to back up what we're trying to do here, the focus needs to be on real infrastructure. But we need the industry, all aspects of the industry, to be bold and stand beside us, because I watch these CEOs blow into town. They got their ESG and they got all this going on. And whatever the government, especially a left-leaning government, proposes, oh yeah, we can reach 54.5 miles per gallon by the year 2025. Remember that one, Chairman? I mean, it's just the corporate average fuel economy. A few years ago under Obama, they agreed to all cars were going to be 54.5 miles per gallon by the year 2025, if I remember correctly. Now, I don't even know what a 54.5 mile per gallon car looks like this little tiny coffin thing. And I sure don't want to buy one. But they were going to force us into averaging the whole fleet for that. I need my F-250 for my ranch, okay? And I also like a Mustang that drives fast, okay? It's not going to get 54.5 miles per gallon. So we need folks. The CEOs, they just come in and they roll over, okay? They just give up. And half of them want to go along with this stuff. Even from energy, I talked to one, ESG is great, and it really isn't about governance, it's about complying with a left-wing agenda. And so we need folks to be bold and be the voice pushing back alongside of us that are pushing back on this electrification of everything. My home state of California runs out of electricity half the time as it is, because they can't, they're tearing out the dams that make hydro. They want to tear out the nuclear power plant that makes power, 24/7 power. And because they don't trim the forest well enough, they have to shut the power off when the wind blows, and especially in my north part of the state, because a tree branch might fall on a power line and cause another 1 million acre fire like happened in my district last year. It's just unbelievable how government operates things. But please, just step with us and be bold on pushing back on stuff that doesn't make any sense, instead of like the CEOs running here, oh yeah, we can comply. Anyway, I'll yield back, but thank you for fighting the fight and showing up here today. Is there any more comments on that? You may not want to touch that, I don't know, but.
I'll just say there are 77 regulatory items that we are looking at really closely across government from various agencies, and I think we really have to pay close attention to the regulatory agenda. because that's where all the action is right now with this administration. And certainly those developments can have a profound impact on manufacturing, on trucking, on construction, thinking of hours of service and any unwanted changes that could happen or occur. There's a lot happening in that space, and it's just important for us to be on top of that.
Thank you very much for being here. I arrived a little late, but one of the things I wanted to talk about, and then I'm going to ask some questions, a couple of comments. You mentioned regulatory issues. This administration, these are their numbers, $201 billion of additional regulations placed on American small businesses in 2021. That's their numbers. That's additional, coming out of COVID. It's unacceptable. Karen from the Stone, Sand, and Gravel, you mentioned reforms. We tried to get more NEPA reforms in. When you try to open up new gravel pit, the bureaucracy in doing it, the investment, it almost doesn't seem like it's worth it. I think that we need to, that's what we're doing in conference. We're trying to reduce the NEPA reforms and still having the best labor and environmental standards, and we can do that. I think you also mentioned in Massachusetts, we follow California. I can tell you in Minnesota, we never follow California, and I tell Doug that all the time. I think that's a bad road to travel. We talk about inflation from the American Trucking Association. You're on the roads across this great nation. Right now, if the inflation stays the way it is, and some say it's going to rise, it's going to be pushing 10%, and some say it's even more than that now, but let's use the number close to 10%. That money is going to be spent over 5 years. That's 50% of road work and other infrastructure projects that won't get done because it's being eaten up by inflation. That's unacceptable, and that affects us all. Speaking of inflation, Counselor, is it Waddell? So you have a budget for your departments. You have fleet services. You have police, fire, public works, etc. How much of an increase have you had to raise your budget from last year to this year, or the prior years to where it is now, just your fuel budget?
The specific number, Congressman, on the fuel number, but I referenced earlier 5 different projects that were projected and estimated for this last year, and the actual cost came in, all of them well over 100% of the budgeted amount. So you can imagine what that does to eat into a small municipal budget, and ultimately ends up either these projects get scrapped or pushed far down the line where they continue to rise, or the burden gets put on the taxpayer in the way of tax increases. That's what I was getting at. So you have a fleet budget. I'm just going to say for your police department of $100,000 a year. Now it's $200,000. You either have to take another project or another great thing you want to do for your city, a development, and put it into the fleet services for gasoline, or you have to raise taxes, devastating on your community. And then we have this government wanting more, putting more regulations on you, unfunded, by the way. It's unacceptable. I sat in your seat, and that's one of the things I couldn't stand coming from St. Paul in this nation's capital, is unfunded mandates that affect all your these small businesses and your member companies. It's unbelievable. Harold, my chief of staff's father is a truck driver. He's not on the road right now. He can't turn a dollar with the prices right now. He goes from Virginia, Minnesota, into Canada. That was his route. Can't do it. It's unacceptable. And so we have an administration that doesn't have the political willpower to be energy independent. We have to be energy independent and mining dominant in this country. This is where we are. I spent the 8 hours yesterday in a markup where my colleague from St. Paul
put forth a 235,000 acre mineral withdrawal in the district that I represent. It's the biggest copper nickel find in North America. This is what we're fighting. This is what we're fighting. And it's not acceptable. I want to ask you, as inflation rises, the economists, the experts say we're pushing into a recession. When we get into that recession, God, I hope we don't, but if we do, what are your member companies, what are you doing to plan for that? I can't imagine how devastating it is for your countries. Can any of you give me an idea of what you or your member folks are preparing to deal with? Anybody?
Congressman, I'll address that. We had a roundtable ourselves within our association and listened to several very small businesses, landscapers, for example, that are right now asked to bid on 3-year, 4-year projects with fertilizer prices rising 400%, fuel rising 200%, and saying they will probably have to close their doors before it's time for them to honor their contracts. Recession hits, it's going to compound that from the small landscaping companies to the mid-sized companies forced to honor their prices that they put forth today of what they're going to be incurring 4 years from now.
Are you doing, are your companies the manufacturers that you're ordering from, are they being flexible in their prices in the contracts at all? And what I mean is, you sign the contract for this amount of material, this cost, and all of a sudden the inflation kicks in. Does that, are you entering into contracts where the price fluctuates due to inflation?
I spoke earlier, we are seeing more and more and more vendors and subcontractors changing terms from our price is firm at the time we're quoting to our price is what it is at time of delivery.
Yeah.
So we, as the contractor submitting the price, have to take the risk and the gamble of what that price is going to be as we turn our price in to agencies like Dr. Wilson's.
I could see that. I think all of us can give examples of industries we know, home builders, private citizens that want to build homes that have stopped because of what's happening, because of the inflation, because of the cost of everything, with supply chain issues and the demand with the products not being available. I just, and I don't want to belabor this point, Mr. Chair, but we really appreciate you coming in here, and you've heard specifically from at least 2 of my colleagues. The alligator's going to eat you too. And I know firsthand, because that alligator bit me yesterday when they took mining 235,000 acres away from my friends and neighbors who are miners. Good, solid wages. So what I'm asking you to do is let's stand up and be bold. I'm a small business owner. I was a small business owner 31 years. This pushed my brothers and I over the edge. We couldn't make it. $5,000 to me is a lot of money. $7,000 is even more when I'm raising 5 kids to keep our business afloat, the 5 of us. All of you know members, all of you have had to do it, or you know members, it's not easy. This inflation and these policies are devastating to the middle class and every one of your member companies, including you, Counselor. It's going to, your city is going to be devastated when you have to come up for your annual talks on your finances for next year. It's devastating. And let me tell you something, it doesn't have to be this way. It does not have to be this way. And I'm telling you, the Republicans on this committee, I see them battle every single day for common sense measures. Remove some of the redundancy in the NEPA reforms, for example, so that bridge in Minnesota doesn't take 14 years. Take 2. And so when we talk about what's going on, unfortunately, in our nation's capital with one-party rule, we're seeing major devastation. And I can't wait till Chairman Graves leads this committee, because I firmly believe you are going to see some changes. They're going to help each and every one of your industries, whether it's in a big way or a small way. I yield back.
I want to reiterate what Mr. Stauber had to say. Thank you very much for coming in today and helping us to be more informed and on the problems that we're seeing in the construction industry in particular when it comes to infrastructure. So thank you all very much for this, and it was greatly helpful. So,
Thank you.